This is the Bush Whisperer coming at you from the most beautiful penguin sanctuary, southern tip of Africa, Boulders Beach, Boulders Penguin Sanctuary, Cape Town. I've come to talk to you today about the chain of being. What is this chain of being of which I keep referring? Of all these beings that are the proverbial chain of being, I want you to consider for a moment, listening to those beautiful penguins, as an extension of my chain of being, the chain of being that runs through me. When you breathe, it is by the virtue of the angels. When you speak, it is by the virtue of the guides. You could use words guides, angels, they're interchangeable. When you move your limb, it is by the virtue of the chain of being. There is a huge chain, an unconscious chain, sadly, for most of us, of beings that constitute the form of our flesh. Think a moment upon the microbes in your body. How many cells have you got in your body? What? I didn't count, but I've heard it said there's about 6 trillion. I've heard it said that there's more than 10 trillion microbes living in your body. Maybe 12 trillion, maybe about 18 trillion cells in the body. Is that right? Regardless, there are many, many more microbes in your physical body than you have cells that are your own DNA, as we speak about our own DNA. And I say that in inverted commas, because that is an expression yet of the chain of being. But even the chain of being of our own DNA is existing in a body where there are more foreign cells. Consider that this is a cooperation, this body, that the organs are individual beings for a moment. This is true shamanic philosophy. It considers the organs as being beings in their own right, considers the tissues as being different forms of life, bless you, considers the cells as all being individual living beings, bless you. It considers the nature of reality as being an expression of this fundamental multiplicity of being, which is essentially stemming from a sense of unity. What does this mean when I say these things? Well, what it means is that small things fit together to make up bigger things. And those bigger things fit together to make up yet larger things. And those larger things fit together to make, much larger things. And those much larger things fit together to make huge things. And those huge things fit together to make totally macro huge things. And those macro huge things are once again tiny things on another scale of being that fit together to make larger things, that fit together to make very much larger things. And so on and so on and so on goes the scale of being. And when we look at the smaller things, those smaller things are made out of yet smaller things that are made out of smaller things. And we think then of molecules, separate living little beings. And we think of atoms as inanimate objects. Are they not just a different form of life on a different scale of being? Then we look at quarks and we notice that quarks are different life forms, different beings. And we go beyond quarks and we start looking at those subatomic particles that are gluons and how the gluons fit in spheres of 6. What are the gluons made out of? We've been told they're the smallest object. Well, we were told quarks were the smallest object. At some point we were told atoms were the smallest. These are all life forms, but of a different order of life, of a different grade of life. For all things are an expression of life. And I would say that as you look into smaller things, you'll see smaller things make them up. And that there's this fundamental ladder of being. And this is just the physical plane. Right. Now let's look at the spiritual planes. There are certain spiritual realities that are made out of other spiritual realities, smaller spiritual realities that are fitting together. And these fit together to form yet smaller realities. And these are constructing larger realities. And so the spiritual scale, as above, so below, is following the same principles. There's this universal expansion of consciousness that is coming from the smallest part. And from the greatest part of the expanse of consciousness, the smallest part is being reflected. Why it is we can see a grain of sand within the whole universe, and why within a grain of sand the whole universe can be seen, experienced, and understood. Because the continuity of being is a chain of beings. And this chain of beings is the structure of being through which reality is seen, experienced, digested, facilitated. So we think of ourselves as being units. We are parts of something bigger. And when we look at who and what we are, there are parts of us. And when we look at those parts, there are parts of those parts. And we look into those parts, there are parts of those parts. The same can be said for the emotional reality. The emotional reality is constructed of emotions. But when we look at these emotions, they form a greater scale of emotion. And we look at that emotion, it forms a greater scale of something else. And when we look into the smaller scales of the emotions, it breaks off into little passions. And we look into those little passions break off into more manifestation or thought objects relating to fantasies and such. And these break off into yet smaller objects that become more consequential. And we end up right here in this tiny little sphere of matter, at the end of it all. We think of matter as being large and that the subatomic space is small. I want you to invert that. Think of it in terms of subatomic space is huge and matter is small. Matter is the contraction of subatomic space. Consider that. Contraction. This universe is a contract. It's a contract between various beings in a sphere of cooperation. And we call these the heavenly choirs in Christian traditions. We call this the pantheons of being from pagan traditions. We call this the guides and the confluence of guides, and how the guides are within themselves, having guides guiding them. And within those guides, there are guides guiding those guides. And there's an infinite structure of guides through the shamanic path. Understanding that the fractal of life is truly the fractal of being, that the fractal of being is truly the fractal of the unseen, and the fractal of the unseen is a confluence of beings, all bound through this chain of causality, through this chain of existence, through this chain of being, by invisible chains of love. So love becomes the connecting facilitation that connects all things to other things, that produces the synergy of harmony in order for life to be expressed. So this is what I mean when I speak of the chain of being, this chain of consciousnesses. There are microbes, there are macrobes. There's an almost seeming infinite series of chains that are connected through this profound chain of being, that bring into being the chain of self. And so when we understand that the self is a dream, that dream is constructed of yet smaller dreams, and those smaller dreams are constructed of yet smaller dreams, and all of these tiny dreams get so small that they become the facilitation of the great dream. And the great dream is part of a greater dream, expressing yet the greater dream of reality. And this reality is a confluence. And to grasp this is to grasp the nature of the self. For the self seems to be something that it's not, seems to be a separate unit, but it's not a separate unit. The self is an expression of this chain of being, and an identity is what we start to attach to the meanings of the chain of being that we're experiencing. And we start to attach these meanings to what we're experiencing, and we call this the self. Though in truth there is selflessness. There's truly many selves operating within each aspect of yourself. And within each aspect of that self, there are many selves operating. To understand how this works, to understand the causality of consciousness. This is the domain and the path of the shaman, which is why nature becomes the guiding principle. For nature is expressing this perfect confluence of being in the way that all creatures are expressions of a greater reality. All creatures are in a state of cooperation, reflecting these divine principles, so that the physical and the mental, spiritual planes can all find a harmonic expression here through what we call reality. Like and share this if you're finding this touching the spot. If you find this interesting, push it out there. Let the algorithms work. Hopefully this can find the right people and they can find the right inspiration from this, and they can start to seek nature to find their own truths. Don't seek the hollow words in books for truth. You will find belief there, ideas. And ideas and belief can as easily become a gateway to the truth as it can become a structure that prevents you from reaching the truth. Though when nature touches your heart, and your heart becomes an expression of what is, you're able to truly find and experience the balance within yourself. And so this becomes what it is you seem to see yourself as and what you think you are. So don't be running away from who you are. Don't be running away from those little impulses. Realize that every thought is a being within the cosmic mind, and every emotion is a counterpart, and they're in partnerships, and that these beings are constructed of smaller beings. Recognize the synergy within yourself, and you will start to see the harmony, and you'll be able to express this harmony and live in synergy with nature. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the daily uploads. Have an absolutely gorgeous day. Don't forget to smile, because life is very short. Make hay while the sun shines and enjoy yourself. Have an absolutely awesome day. Om Shanti.